Hey, everybody. Phyllis Campbell is one of the great leaders in the Pacific Northwest, both in the business world and the nonprofit community. And her story is one of resilience, and it dates back to her childhood. This week, Phyllis shares stories of the people and moments that shaped her life, including how her dad watched his father taken away to an internment camp during World War II, and how her dad chose to show his commitment to America by enlisting in the U.S. Army. From humble beginnings in Spokane, Washington, she faced her own discrimination, working her way up through the banking industry. But she persevered and became a great leader, so much so that Jamie Dimon himself personally recruited her to lead JP Morgan Chase in the Northwest after the fall of Washington Mutual Bank. Phyllis is a humble and thoughtful person that is still mentoring young women today in the midst of her own health challenges, which we discuss as well. This one is full of great stories and lessons, and we appreciate and we're grateful for our time with Phyllis Campbell. So thanks for jumping in, Phyllis. Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Greg. This is a real honor to be interviewed for this, and I hope we find a few takeaways for your audience today.
Well, I think there will be plenty from you, from your family, from your work career. And, look, let's talk right off the bat about resilience, because you're facing a battle yourself right now, a health battle. So why don't you tell us about that and give us an update on that?
Well, sure. And I talk openly about this, I think, because it does help others. This is actually my second bout of a battle with cancer. So 40 years ago, when I was a very young person, I had some form of cancer, which took me a year out, basically, to get over. So, blithely and probably naively thought I was done with that thing until cancer found me again in my later life here. So almost a year ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was a shock, to be really honest. But to cut a very long story short, I've been through now almost 10 months of surgery, chemo, 6 rounds of chemo. I'm still here and I'm still fighting, and I'm very optimistic that this will be cured. And I still have about 15 sessions of radiation to go after this. However, I think there's a couple things I would share with you and with your audience is that I think all of the experiences of my previous battle with cancer, my support system, the lessons learned, the resilience that probably was formed many years ago has really helped me through this. And I really have to say I'm very blessed and lucky. And I would also say that we're very fortunate to have the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center here, which is one of the best in the world. So I have some of the best team of breast cancer oncologists. I have such a great network of friends who are retired oncologists and people that have really surrounded me with the best support and help. So I'm really lucky, and I feel like I'm going to come out of this being just fine, even though it's been difficult.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, because I think it's important for people to see what it's like and to understand that there's hard things out there. And as you go through it, we talk about community and how important community is. And what has your community and support system been like, and how important has that been for you?
Well, sure. Well, I think one of my lessons, Greg, I would say to you first is for me to accept support and help. And that's not been easy for me in my life. I'm a very self-determined, self-reliant person, probably because I saw my father have to go through so many battles and on his own use grit and resilience to get through so much. And I think, probably early on, I thought, you got to just power through everything and do it yourself, and only as a last resort, reach out. So I think I've learned over my long life, I'm a slow learner, trust me, that you do have to accept that people want to help you. It's not just about me helping everybody else, which I'm very good at and love to do. But even at my, as I say, old age and getting this second bout of cancer, I've realized that people want to help, and I've got to be able to say thank you, absolutely, drop a meal off, come over and visit, bring food, bring anything that it will help me to to heal. And so I think I've learned to just basically say, yes, I accept support. And that's what community is about, really, to your question. It's about, yes, what you give to the community, but it's also, as my first mentor told me, it's about, he used to say, the more you give, the more you get back.
Mm,
It's an unending cycle. And he said, that's really what life's about. You don't do it because you want to get stuff back, but you do get things back. And you need to say, no, those are gifts that people want to give you, and this community wants to give you back. So having my community here, having lived in this state my entire life, has been so important. And having all my family here, my husband, Bill, my support team, they've all been a part of my community that I built up over the many years that I've been here, and I'm grateful.
So this is your second bout with cancer. And I don't know if either time is different from the other one, but because you were younger the first time around, I wonder about your perspective on time. Does it change? Does it change the way you look at things? You were semi-retired when this diagnosis came in. You're still active in nonprofits and board work. What does it do to your perspective on time, if anything?
No, it definitely changes things. And I would say again, the blessing of having cancer 40 years ago probably began to shift my perspective about the importance of family and friends and community and giving back and, taking those timeouts. Because I would say, certainly in my early career, I was probably the most driven person around. And not that that's a bad thing in early career. You do need to make sure you're, giving 150% to your professional life because you're building your profession. But I probably was giving 200%
Mm,
to my career exclusively. And I was very good at it and I got promoted because of it. But I think when I got that first diagnosis of cancer, what it, I think, taught me is that, first of all, you need to take time for yourself. So that was a big lesson, is that, my health was obviously should have been more of a priority. It wasn't. Not that that caused the cancer,
mm,
but it certainly didn't help to be working so much as I did. So number one, taking time for myself, but then taking time to build that support network that you just referenced, family, friends, reaching out, taking the time to have those coffees that I used to think were a waste of time.
mm.
So all of that, I think I learned early.
Uh,
Probably now, I would say I do think I incorporated that in my life, by the way. But I'd say now I think there's another rebalancing that's happening. And it probably is this a little bit more because now I'm, much older, maybe in the last several chapters. I would say in the last several chapters, what I'd hope to do is to really spend more time in, yes, personal health and health of my family and friends, and making sure that the friendships and all that are nurtured, but spending more time in gratitude, if
mhm,
that makes any sense.
mhm.
Being grateful every day for sometimes the little things that we take for granted, the beautiful sunrise, the wonderful weather that we enjoy here in the Pacific Northwest, all the things that, I take a walk, for example, in the morning thinking, how far can I walk and how fast can I walk?
Yeah.
But now I take these walks and think, I'm watching every step and appreciating what's right there in front of me. If it's a beautiful new flower, it's a beautiful cloud in the morning. If it's a nice sunset, I'll stop and just breathe and look at the sunset and appreciate, what I have in front of me. So gratitude. And then I think a little bit more about hope. What can what does this inform for me to do differently going forward, for other people, for myself, but I think mostly for maybe community and purpose. So I think there's just a little more richer contextual things to the kind of early, yes, take more time. Yes, 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 all that's important. But now it's more, what am I grateful for today, for this present moment? And that does mean a lot more now.
Yeah, it's great for you to share that because, hopefully we can take something from that and we don't have to maybe get a cancer diagnosis to be grateful and you had that early and were able to be grateful along the way. The other word that comes to mind I wonder about is contentment. like finding contentment in where you are in life. And it doesn't mean you stop having goals and pursuing things, but I think gratitude and contentment tend to go together. And perhaps we don't give ourselves enough of that when we're grinding in our careers. Would you agree?
Oh, I think that's a great observation. Yeah, I think contentment is, as you say, what it's not. Maybe it's not that you don't hope for and try to do more and additional things, because I don't think we're ever done. I'm a lifelong learner and a lifelong doer and a lifelong contributor.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think contentment means we're ever content to just sit here
Mm-hmm.
and be content with the way things are today. But what I think your point is, contentment means be very focused on the present. What we have now is probably good enough for now. The new opportunity, if it's meant to be, will present itself. And I really am a firm believer in that now. So the contentment, I think, means don't always strive to think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? How do I do, more and better? That's a kind of an empty game,
Yeah.
actually. So I think that's really maybe a really good observation. I'm really content with understanding that the opportunity will arise when it's meant to arise, and that's good enough.
Yeah, and celebrating the wins along the way, right? Celebrating the
Yes,
wins,
yes, yes.
and in parenting, I've realized that with there's a saying about someday you'll realize these were the good old days, so you're in the good
Right,
old days, enjoy them,
right,
and
right, exactly. Yes,
so I do want to talk about your career because it's a fascinating career, and as a father of two daughters, I think you're a great inspiration.
thank
But
you.
I want to talk about your upbringing and your family history because you touched on that about resiliency. And I think that's such a big part of your story. All of our stories, oftentimes, is our family. So, talk about your grandparents and the struggles they went through.
Sure. Well, my grandfather on my father's side was actually on a boat. He was born in Japan. He was actually born to a upper class family, so they had money to send him to graduate school at Cambridge. But back then, in the turn of the century, that was by a long, slow boat.
Mm.
But unfortunately, he got robbed of all his money on the boat across the
Wow.
Pacific, and he ended up on the docks of Seattle with no money. And the Maryknoll Fathers, who were missionaries at the time, taking in immigrants, took him in. So it was a great story about someone who came from privilege, who was going to be a great scholar, but ended up penniless on the docks of Seattle with no resources, didn't really speak a ton of English, a little bit, but had to start over. And so I listened to that story, and I did know my grandfather. I was lucky to have known him maybe the last 10 years of his life. He picked blueberries in Bellevue to get some family money, and eventually got enough money to bring that to a grocery store on Capitol Hill. And everything was going great. He married, eventually brought a woman, a picture bride from Japan. They had 8 kids. It was a big family, and they all came to Seattle. And eventually the grocery store made enough money to support the family. Long story short, fast forward to early 1940s, World War II broke out. Japanese Americans were tagged as alien enemies. Didn't matter if you were an American, and my grandfather was a U.S. citizen by then. The internment order went out, which said all residents of Japanese American ancestry would be relocated, which was a euphemism for sent to prison camps off the West Coast. So my father told me the story. He said, remember to knock on the door. 2 men in dark suits, they were FBI, grabbed him, said, get a toothbrush, get one change of clothes. We're taking you away. And there were these 8 kids just watching their father,
Wow.
my grandfather, being taken away. They had no idea what was going on. They knew it was probably related to the order, but they just took him with no word of where he was going. Well, because he was a community leader back then, and he was a leader in the arts community in Seattle, he got taken to a military base in North Dakota. They found out several years later. Within a week, they were told, you all will be taken to the Puyallup center, where they were basically sending people. So they had a week to sell the family grocery store. My dad's older brother, I luckily got my father out to a foster home in Spokane and two of his sisters, but the rest were all basically relocated to the internment camp in Minidoka, Idaho. So, I mean, I think back on those times in the early, I guess, 1944, when that internment order went out. And here were these loyal US citizens being forcibly grabbed and forcibly put in these prison camps, literally. And it was 100,000 people off the West Coast. And I think back on how would I have reacted? How would I have been? What would I have said? What would I have done? And I remember my father telling me the story years later saying, my father before he left said, "This is our country. We need to do what our country says. We may not agree with it, but we're US citizens. This is what our country said. Do the right thing." He said, he said, I had to follow what my father said. So he enrolled in the US Army.
Wow.
And that was something that I wouldn't have expected out of my father's story. He said, I'm going to fight for our country. I'm going to prove my loyalty to the US, United States. So my father enrolled in the US Army as a private, started from the very bottom. He basically told the story and said it was very, very difficult after high school to enroll in the Army. He wasn't treated well, but there were a lot of Japanese Americans who did that and became decorated units for the United States Army. So I just tell that story only in that it kind of informs, I think, the listeners. There was a story of huge adversity, huge
Mhm.
upheaval, huge, just really disorienting times. And yet out of that comes this story of loyalty, of patriotism, of resilience, of grit to, move on and serve a country that literally was imprisoning some of his own kin.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because your dad remembers his father being taken away. I mean, that memory by itself is so powerful, and he could have gone one of two ways, right? He could have been anti-American, right? He could have looked at
Bitter,
America
never
bitter,
bitter.
angry, but he chose to go the other way. And I think he ended up in a troop that was largely Japanese American
Yes,
too,
yes, it was
right?
called the 442nd. And he unfortunately did not get deployed to France, where they fought to free the French villages. And by the way, a large battalion from Texas that were trapped. So this was a decorated unit that took a lot of casualties. You're absolutely right. One of the most decorated, but heavy, experienced the heaviest casualties in the war. So yes, they were a very large troop of specifically Japanese Americans. And I think my father's regret was he broke his arm in training camp, never got deployed. But later, in the later years, he came back to Seattle. Well, he first came to Spokane, which is where I was born. Our family was born. But later, in his later years, formed a center here in Seattle called the Nisei Vet Center to honor the legacy of these great fighting soldiers. And that was kind of his way of saying, I want to pay it forward. I didn't get to fight, but I really want to make sure people hear the story.
So even after your father joins the military and comes out of that, he still faces discrimination, though, at that point, right?
Yes, yes. And he told the story in a poignant way because we were very lucky to grow up in Spokane, which is a wonderful small town community. But he told the story when he got back to Spokane after he was discharged from the Army. He sat down at the lunch counter in his Army uniform and they refused to serve him and said, "We
Wow.
don't serve Japs." And here he was in his, I mean, I can't picture this, in
Yeah.
his US Army uniform and his cap. He was a private, so he didn't have a lot of rank, but still, he just was stunned by that. And then he went to look for a job and was refused many times. But a good man, a dry cleaners, actually told him, listen, if you're willing to work hard, I don't care what color your skin is, I'll teach you how to dry clean. And he said, I'll take it. And he ended up being one of the best dry cleaners around and owning his own business, eventually the dry cleaning business, Beacon Cleaners. But I listened again to that story and thought, how did he persist? How did he then not get angry? How did he not then get defensive? And as he told the story, it wasn't in a defensive way. It was just, listen, this is going to happen to you. This can happen to you at school. This could happen to you at work. Especially, he knew me as the first child in the family, being a woman. He said, you're going to face some of these kinds of things. You really just need to understand where it's coming from, persist, show people that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and work hard, just as hard as anybody else, and you will overcome those barriers. So he used it as a lesson, really, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, so much wisdom in that, in teaching his children that lesson along the way. And would you think back on that? Would you, whether consciously or subconsciously, would that be there for you as we go on to talk about your
Oh,
career?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, those lessons, and then watching him run his own small business, and persist through all the headaches of a small business owner. And, we worked in the business growing up. So all of those lessons just came back to me. And I guess I would say on the positive side, that's where I learned too my love of business, because he made us do everything in the business, from cleaning the toilets to waiting the counter to balancing the books to, just watching and observing how dry cleaning went on. So, I always thought to myself, I mean, that's sort of the way you get into business, is you roll up your sleeves and don't be too proud to do anything. And as he said, those lessons about resilience and persisting through the dark days when the payroll is running out and you have employees you're responsible for. I mean, all those things come back to me as lessons of resilience and grit and perseverance. Sure.
Yeah. And so you go on to Washington State University, you graduate from there, and you start looking for that first job. What was that like? This is in the early 70s, so a woman in business. What was the job opportunities like for you at that point?
Well, there's kind of sort of the bad news and the good news in that. The bad news is it was really tough. I was at that time, because I was such an early female in
Mm,
business, in at WSU. I was, only a class of, say, 12% of us were female in the business school. So coming out of there, everywhere I went, and I wanted to work in Spokane because that's where my future husband was. We were getting married that summer after graduation. So I applied at a whole bunch of different places, from retailers to you name it. And I got kind of the same, maybe not as verbose a response as some, but many would say, women don't tend to last in our management ranks and our management training because they get pregnant and quit. One
mm.
one employer actually said that to me. Another said, "Well, women don't really like to work for other women, and so we don't we really don't think we should take the risk." So I mean, a lot of that, whether it was said or unsaid, was what I experienced. And then the good news is, well, I'll say one thing is something I had to do myself. The other one was the good news of a mentor sponsor.
Mm.
But the good news was, back to that resilience, I just said in the bank that I applied for, I'm not taking no for an answer. I am the best person for you and for your job. And I got a little bit stubborn about it. Maybe that's not such a good trait that I got from my
I
father,
don't know. It
but
might have
at
worked.
least it worked. I called them every day, every weekday for almost 3.5 weeks. And they said, "Is this Phyllis Campbell again?" Or Phyllis Takasaki at that
Yeah.
point. I said, "Yes, it is. And I just want to make sure you know that I'm still the best person for your job in your management training program." And I honestly think, Greg, they got so sick of me calling. The guy finally said, "You know what? I mean, the fact you keep calling me every day, I
Yeah.
just want to get rid of you. So I'm going to hire you."
Yeah. That's great.
That's a true story.
Yeah, well, and that
And
still
the other,
applies today. That still apply I
it
think that
still
if
applies
somebody shows
today.
that initiative today, it might be even more impactful, I think, because it's so easy to just move on or just, you know,
Give
make an
up and
excuse, give up. Yeah, so that
accept.
is
Yeah.
important.
So, no, that was really important. And then along came, when I did get my first job, my first mentor sponsor, I call him more of a sponsor, was the chairman of the bank, who, he wanted us to get more involved, not just in our jobs, but in the community, which was I think he was a real role model for my entire life about being involved. And he used to say, as a bank, we get our business from the community, we get our profits from the community. We need to make sure we get put it, much of it back. So he really saw that I wanted to do that, and he opened a couple doors for me to get involved with the chamber and other things. And then he also wanted us to get involved in politics. So he put us through a course called Practical Politics. I still remember that. And I became a precinct committee person, just to learn what it was all about. And he saw that in me, and he said, "I just really appreciate the fact that you've taken this seriously." And we kind of formed a friendship out of that. And then he became a mentor for me to really help open some doors in my early career ladder that may not have been open for me. And I really always look back, and he's still living, by the way, in his 90s, skiing in Sun Valley,
That's
Dave
great.
Clack. And I'm very appreciative of what he did for me early on.
So were those early roles in the banking business like for you, and what aspirations did you have?
Well, the early roles were just ground up. I mean, honestly, and I'm glad for that because the management training program was you spent time on the teller line, you spent time learning the credit areas, you spent time learning the operations areas in a branch. I mean, it was really, really grassroots. Learn everything that you need to know to be, what a bank does, basically. So, I'd say I was probably the epitome because of working in my father's dry cleaning business of the person that not afraid to do anything. I'd get if I was the first one there in the morning, I'd be making the coffee. If I was the early last one there, I'd be emptying the trash, and asking the tellers and head teller what I could do to help her balance. So, I guess I was very lucky in that, I think I was one of those folks that said, just do what it takes to learn, but also to show people I'm willing to help anybody. And, as I learn, I want to give back as well. So it was really not a bad, I was really well accepted until later in my career. Maybe that was a couple of years when I started getting into actual positions. I was a branch manager of a branch. So I had a sponsor and mentor that helped me get a branch manager job. There weren't many women managers. So I got a break in my 20s to manage a branch and grow it, which was great. But as I began to go slightly more up the ladder, I wanted to apply for commercial loan officer positions. And I do remember one of the hiring managers saying, I can't hire you for this. First of all, you're a minority,
Hmm.
you're a woman, the CFOs are all white males, and they are not going to accept you. So I'm actually protecting you.
Wow.
And I remember looking back at him and saying, I wish you'd just give me a chance. I know I'm going to face obstacles. I know what you're talking about. And I, quote, appreciate your wanting to protect me, but don't protect me. Put me out there and let me show you what I can do. And he said, no, we're passing you over. So there were things like that that hit me several times, including for a very large region opportunity I thought I was qualified for. So I realized, look, everything isn't equal. My gender, the color of my skin, because I was different back then, in the early days, being the only woman and a person of color in those positions or looking to those positions, there were going to be barriers. And that was what my father taught me. You're going to hit those barriers and
Hmm.
you're going to ask yourself, why is this? But prove yourself and step in and, tell people to give you a chance. And in some cases, I got a chance, but in some cases, I didn't. So that was just the way it was back then.
So that perseverance pays off, though. You stuck with it. You kept grinding, and you end up as the CEO of U.S. Bank of
Yes, but
Washington.
again,
Right?
Greg, I would say that not on my own, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we never make these journeys alone. That's my lesson is that my second mentor, who was the president of US Bank, was another person, I think, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And when the job came open, when he became vice chairman of the company and was moving to the headquarters city out of Seattle, he called me to his office and said, I know you need to sit down because I'm going to offer you something that probably you're going to be uncomfortable with, but I want you to do it. And I said, what's that, Gary? It was Gary Cameron, who's now passed on. But he said, I'm offering you my job, the president CEO of US Bank of Washington, and I believe you can do it. I know you're sitting there looking at me about to say no, but you're much more qualified than most because, first of all, you develop people, you give everybody else credit, you know that this job is not about you. And that's why I'm picking you. And you need to say yes, and I'll be there to support you. And I just almost said no. But I think that was because of the imposter syndrome
Hmm.
that many women go through. And that is, I'm not qualified. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh. What if I fail? It's going to be a big public failure. I can't I don't think I could maybe stomach a public failure of not being the most successful CEO. So He could read my body language though, and he said, well, I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about it. Go home and talk to Bill. Go home and talk to whoever you need to talk to. But tomorrow, I really expect that you'll come back and take this. And I did, but I was scared to death.
What did it feel like then, or maybe even later, to have someone believe in you? Right, it's probably more than you believed in yourself. What did that feel like for you?
Yeah, it felt the imposter syndrome was still there, which the voice in the back of my head said, oh yeah, but if he really knew that, or if he knew that I wasn't prepared, or if he knew that some of the public reaction isn't going to be as positive as he thinks, if he so those old tapes always play. And I think that, when I counsel and coach young women today, I always say, don't buy into the imposter
Hmm.
syndrome, because whatever you call it, there are studies that still show. There was a study maybe done about 5 years ago that show that, many women think you have to be 95% qualified in every respect before you raise your hand and say yes. Whereas I think young men tend to think, if I'm 60% qualified, that's good enough. I
Hmm.
can learn on the job. So I think there needs to be a closing of that gap, if you will, where you're at least aware of what's that tape is playing in the back of your head, and say, I can't buy into that. And so to have somebody say to me, you're more than qualified, and there's a lot of guys out there that are raising their hand for this job, but I'm picking you because you are qualified, meant the world to me. And I thought, even though I heard this tape saying, yeah, but he doesn't know that I don't have this or don't have that, he said I'm qualified, and he said I'll back you. And so having that level of confidence in my 40s to take a major bank CEO job was everything. And I still thank him today. And, he's one of two mentors, sponsors in my career that I really credit for giving me that extra push.
Yeah, I think it's so important to. I don't think we realize the effect we can have on somebody else by telling them we believe in them. Like, I mean, on a much smaller scale, I had a wrestling coach from another team when I was in high school that I knew call me and tell me, like, I know you can win this next tournament. It was a big deal to me. And like, just him believing in me made a difference. And
Doesn't it? It absolutely does. Male or female. I mean,
right.
it's probably more exacerbated for females. That's why I told you I love your story about how proud you are of your two daughters. And I know you probably tell them every day, if
Mm-hmm.
not, probably several times a week, how much you love them, believe in them, know they're going to be the best at whatever they do. I mean, those are things my father also did for me back when. So I think back on and they were mostly, men in my life that were my mentors, sponsors. So I always tell, man, look, you're allies to women, whether you're a parent, whether you're in the corporate suite, whether you're a colleague, it doesn't matter. But, that extra boost of coming from a male to a female, that extra message, that extra, hey, I noticed you gave that speech. I really enjoyed these 2 points. You were great. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I always encourage, men to be allies to women too. And,
Yes.
it makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. You end up taking that role, and you're the first woman to take something like that in Washington. Um, you probably still face some pushback, though. I'm guessing. I mean, it wasn't all easy street. So, what was it like? In navigating those waters?
Well, that was the voice in my head was a little bit accurate, saying, "Oh my gosh, there's going to be not all as positive a reaction as maybe Gary thinks." So Gary told me he did get some calls from customers saying, "I
Mm,
can't believe you promoted this da 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 to this position." And he told me, and he said, here's what I told him. He said, she is the unanimous choice of me, of the board, of all of senior management. We 100% back her. If you don't like it, there's other places that you can take your
that's
business.
great.
It was
That's
that,
great.
that direct. And he said, I really feel strongly about it. If people have those kinds of biases, we don't need to have their business. And then the other thing that happened was I found out a couple CEO competitors that, well, she's, quote, a lightweight, or she's not going to make it in this job. So let's go out and grab all of, quote, their customers.
Mm,
And so that got back to me really quickly. And of course, then there goes my stubborn, I'll show,
sure.
I'll show you,
Yeah, the
you
fire.
know, which again is maybe not a positive trait of mine, but I tend to think not in a combative way, but in a way that says, look, it's not about me anyway. It's about the team here. And how do we as a team become better, sharper? How do we bring forth our best game? And so it was about rallying our team, not about me. And I think as long as I made it about that, we really, I think, stood up to the test of time. And again, hopefully my experiences are not what's happening today because of hopefully some of the battles that we faced early on as women in leadership.
So you have that career at U.S. Bank, and eventually you go on to Seattle Foundation, run a very large nonprofit, and then in 2008, during the financial crisis, J.P. Morgan is buying Washington Mutual Bank, and Jamie Dimon comes knocking, uh, and you were reluctant. So what was that like, and why were you reluctant to pursue that opportunity?
Well, yeah, it does relate to what you said about Seattle Foundation. I mean, what better job could you have as a leader being in the most beloved institution in
Mm,
Seattle, the Community Foundation? The Seattle Foundation gives grants, we help donors, we help philanthropy, we, really basically help the nonprofit infrastructure be strong for Seattle. So, I would say I would continue to learn a lot. I was in year 6 of my job, and the board had given me a great review. We'd love you to stay, for at least another 4 years till 10 years, which I originally said was hopefully my intention. So, all that to say, things were going great. I had the best job in town. I've never taken a job for money. I don't, I've always taken a job because I can contribute, learn, give back, da da da. And so the Seattle Foundation was an amazing platform for that, Greg. And I think as I took a pause in 2008, I watched Washington Mutual, which was a terrible thing for this community, implode. And I was so distressed because the first thing that came to mind was, oh my gosh, we're going to lose a lot of the philanthropy,
hmm
the good that WAMU did, the employee base, the headquarters, everything that, WAMU did was such an integral part of this region and beyond. So, but I never thought it had anything to do with me. I mean, honestly, everything was horrible, but it didn't have nothing to do with me. And yes, it where it began to have something to do with me is 2008 when WAMU was bought by JP Morgan Chase. Jamie came out to meet with the employees and sought me out at a lunch at the Washington Athletic Club. And I had met Jamie before, but only to shake his hand. And he specifically, at the end of the lunch, came over to me and said, when I get back to New York, I'm going to call you. And I just looked at him and thought, I don't understand what that's about, but
hmm
okay, fine. Thank you. And we parted ways. Sure enough, the next Monday called me and said, I really need to talk to you about an opportunity, and I'm going to have his recruiter follow up with me. And I said, what is it about? The board? I wasn't even sure what he was calling me about. He
hmm
said, no, 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 I need you to be an executive to help integrate WAMU into JP Morgan Chase and to make sure that we do things in the right way. And I said, no, thank you. I've got a great job. I really did. I said,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you what, I'll give you, if you have your recruiter call me, I'll give her 2 names of people I think would be amazing for this job, but I'm not interested. I literally said no, and people laugh at me. You said no to Jamie. I said, well, I said no to the opportunity
Mm,
because I wasn't looking for a job. So I kind of left it at that. Sure enough, one thing led to another. And I think one of the things that finally piqued my interest was I said, you know, I've got the banking, I've got the community knowledge, I've got the, really, I think the network here. And the recruiter said, there's not many people who can do what you do. And that's why Jamie's calling you. Will you come to New York and at least talk to him? And if you don't agree and you don't think it's the right thing, then you can go back to your job at the Seattle Foundation and no harm done and nobody will be the wiser. I said, you're right. Okay. So, long story short, I did. I went to New York, met with Jamie, and Jamie sat me down and said, okay, I need to know what are the 3 or 4 things you need to be successful in this job. well, that's a great recruiting technique, right?
Sure.
So I thought, okay, now he's kind of got me. So I'm listing the 3 or 4 things. When the last thing was, I need a philanthropy budget that was at least equal to WAMU's
Mm,
philanthropy budget here, even though it's a new market for the bank. And I need to make sure that we have great autonomy to put money and resources back where things are needed. And I need to make sure that I have your personal support, including coming out to the market every year for at least the next 3 or 4 years,
mhm.
because it's important to show your face. And then said, okay, okay. And then the other 2 things, okay, okay. What else? I said, well, I haven't said yes to this job. So I said, well, tell you what, on the way back to Seattle on the plane, why don't you write your job description? Because I don't know, how it looks. We don't have this job. You call yourself what you want. You write it the way you want. We will give you all the support and resources because we need you. And you can do it for as many years as you want. But, just send it back to me. And again, if we both look at it and say it's not the right thing, then fine, you go your own way. And of course, he had me hooked at that point, Greg. But I said to myself again, I really do feel strongly that this is an important bank to have a great bank here. And JP Morgan Chase has the ethos. Jamie has the right stuff. He's a great human being. I always knew that about him, not just
Mhm.
a great financial leader, but a great human being, has the values that I espouse and aspire to. So I did say yes, but it was really tough, I'll
Yeah,
tell you. I
yeah.
I said yes, not naively, by the way, because I knew it'd be tough,
Well, and
and it was very tough.
it was tough because, I mean, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that that time there was a lot of uncertainty in the economic, conditions of not only Seattle but the nation, right? And all the mortgages and thousands of
Oh,
people were losing their
and
job in the
anger, a lot of anger,
anger.
a
People were
lot of
mad, right?
anger,
Mad at
right.
banks, mad at
Mad at
Washington
big
Mutuals,
banks,
yeah, mad at big banks.
right.
So it wasn't in you were stepping into a difficult situation and trying to take care of people that at the bank too. Some of them were losing their jobs, so
Right, right,
it was
right,
difficult.
because we did, end up taking a lot of WAMU employees, which was fantastic, especially in the retail side, the branch side. We needed all those great employees that were part of the WAMU team. So yes, we were lucky that we were able to retain a lot of them, but a lot of them at headquarters, the corporate jobs, are given opportunities to go to New York or Chicago or other centers that JP Morgan Chase had, but didn't want to or couldn't. So I think an example though of where I think I made a difference, and I working with Jamie's, certainly humanity made a difference, is that, we said we don't have to pay severance. We don't have to pay year-end bonuses. I mean, the acquisition came with no strings attached. You
Hmm.
can just basically do what you want to do and,
Yeah.
so be it. But I think one of the things that we said was, look, these folks have worked long and hard. Their stock was worth nothing after they bought a lot of shares in the employee stock ownership plan. So, what's the right thing to do? Well, the right thing to do is to pay year end bonuses, give people transition counseling, give people a severance, for working X number of months if they decided not to relocate, and to really help people maybe find another life and career if they wanted to stay in Seattle. So, I think back in those times, and no, couldn't take care of everybody in the way that maybe, I wish we could have, but we took, Jamie really backed us up with philanthropy. And I used to say to everybody over time, here's examples of really the values of JP Morgan Chase. It's about community, it's about customers. Give us a chance. That's all I can say. When
Hmm.
people would say, oh, you just took the money and went to a big Wall Street evil bank, I'd say, it's not true. I mean, I'll blame you for being angry, but don't direct the anger at me or at the JP Morgan Chase. Just give us a chance to show what we're about. But that anger persisted in different pockets and places I didn't expect. But hey, maybe that was goes back to my father's, story. I mean,
Right.
look at what he faced, and that was very personal. So I knew this wasn't personal, but it certainly felt personal a lot. And by about 3 to 4 or 5 years, people finally said, "We get it.
Yeah.
We're with you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on." But it just changed just as hard. Change is hard.
And so Jamie's profile is even bigger today than it was back then. I mean, he's known as one of the great leaders in business in the world, if not just the U.S. You got a chance to work with him directly. What you gave a great example of what kind of leader he is, or at least what kind of recruiter he is. But are there any takeaways you have from your time, working with him in that role that you had there?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll give you both a example from back then because I did say I'd stay 7 years. I stayed 14, so that tells you,
Yes.
that I had a real attachment to someone working for someone who was a leader I could really learn from, and I respected a great deal. So, and then I'll give you a current example, but the example back then was Jamie would always talk about, and he still actually talks about, his values and his priorities. And he would say that, and your top priorities should be your health, your family,
Mm,
your faith, if you have one, JP Morgan Chase, and, the rest of your life. But probably in that order, and that we know everybody works hard and the bank, we definitely expect a lot, but it should never be your top priority. And he lives that
mhm.
every day. I mean, I don't a year didn't go by where I didn't hear about his daughters. He had three daughters, by the
Mhm,
way,
mhm.
no sons, who all turned out to have, I think he has now 10 grandkids, but maybe seven of them are girls.
Yeah,
So, he definitely
girl
was
dad.
a female yeah, girl dad, and very proud of all of them. So he would always talk mostly about take time for your family. If you have a soccer match at 3 o'clock of your kids, go to your soccer match. You'll get back and figure out how to get the work done. But your kids need to take priority. Don't miss that recital. Don't. And that really was a big, big message. And at Friday night at New York time, 6 o'clock, he'd shut off his email, never answer an email all weekend, meaning that I want you to take your weekends.
Mhm,
Now, I know he answered emails all weekend. He just didn't push send until Monday. But the
mhm.
message was, look, we want you to spend time doing things that are important to you, and that health and family and all the other things that are priorities. And I think that's just an amazing message for, the largest bank in the world, but also one of the most prominent leaders, as you say. So a current example was, I mean, this is Jamie. I've been gone now from the bank for almost 2.5 years. He heard about my illness.
Oh,
I haven't been public within my former colleagues to say a lot about it. So, but he heard about it, called me on his cell phone. He was on vacation and said, I saw it ring and I was on a Zoom call, so I just let it go to voicemail. But I looked it up and thought, oh, Jay Dimon, huh? Interesting. Well, I'll call back because I heard his voice. It's Jamie, call me back. So I called him back and I said, Jamie, how are you? He said, no, I'm not calling about me. I'm calling about you. Why didn't you tell me what's going on?
mhm.
You know, I've been through throat cancer. You know, I went through what I went through. Where are you in chemo? What's going on? How many sessions? So just drilling me about it. But that's very Jamie. And he
Yeah,
said, look, I'm on vacation. I want you to have my cell phone. You need anything, you call me. As soon as you're through all this, I know you're going to be fine. I believe you'll be fine. I know you'll be fine, but I want to take you to lunch. But call me anytime you need something. And I mean, I think that says it all, right?
yeah,
I mean, he's in the middle of a whole bunch of calls with who knows what world leader. And
right.
this is a vacation call that he's calling me, telling me to call him. So, but that doesn't surprise me. That is very Jamie. That is at the essence who he is. So when he says health, family, priorities, he really lives it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I respect so much, other than just being a fantastic leader, right?
Yeah, those are great stories, and really sounds like he's tying in gratitude. I would guess he's a person that stops to be grateful for the things around him. I mean, weaving in those those priorities that you're talking about.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he not only did he have esophageal cancer, and I do remember him going through the chemo sessions and visiting him in his office, but he also in 2020, just right at the beginning of COVID, had a aortic
Mm,
dissection, which is a very serious heart condition that could have killed him. Luckily, he got to emergency in time. Luckily, they got it repaired. But I think what he realized is that, I mean, again, like my two cancer battles, he's had two very life threatening battles. So you don't take things for granted. It does bring back that sense of being in the present and, as you say, gratitude.
So you've had some mentors that you've talked about that have had a huge impact on you, and I know mentorship is important to you. Do you think that comes partially from, in a way, your dad being a mentor to you, but these other people and that impact is what makes you want to be a mentor to others?
Well, sure. I do think I have a lot of lessons that I've learned and mistakes I've made. So I talk openly about mistakes as well as things that have gone great. Because as I say to people, if you take risks, you're going to make mistakes. If you take, if you don't take risks, by the way, you'll never have growth. So the message is you have to take risks, but you also have to accept the fact that it's not always going to go well.
Hmm.
And when you make that mistake, how do you dust yourself off, ask yourself what you do differently next time and move on? So I think particularly for women, it's a message that I really enjoy sharing because, again, the mistakes, they're not fatal. They're just good teachers. So to your question, I think they're the two lessons that I really love mentoring women and, all young people basically through my work with different universities and with young people. I really do love to spend the time saying, there's a couple of lessons about taking risk. One is you got to grow and if you want to grow, you've got to take risks, that is. So growth involves risk. Risk, yes, you look at the upside, the downside, but ultimately you've got to step into taking the chance. And if your tummy feels uncomfortable, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So say yes, do it, and you're going to make mistakes. It's okay. Just dust yourself off. You make sure you have the support behind you and then move on because that's part of the learning process. And then the second lesson is always give back, have that contributor mindset. Make sure that, you're thinking for the good of the whole, not yourself. It's not about your narrow area. It's how are you leaving something better than you found it? And, I think in my life, whether I've joined a board, whether I've taken a job opportunity, whether I've, decided how to spend some of my discretionary time, I always think, how am I going to leave this a little bit better? And if I can't, or I won't, or I don't feel that it's something that calls me, then I don't do it. There's no sense to do it for ego or title,
Hmm.
certainly not money. So I say do everything you do with a contributor mindset. That is, leave a legacy, leave it better than you found it. So I think the mentoring, Greg, is not that profound. It's just very simple life lessons that have served me well. And when I get a chance to give examples and talk to particularly young people, young women like your daughters or other people who might be listening, it's just a little bit of you can do this. It's a good thing, but do it for the greater good. Don't do it for other reasons that may not have anything to do with, leaving it better than you found it.
Yeah. It helps them and it helps you too. I mean, it helps the person that's mentoring or giving or coaching. A lot of that comes in, coaching high school sports or youth sports.
Sure.
When you talk about risk too, Phyllis, I think about that's also failure, facing, failure or not being afraid to fail. And I think that's something, and it's really what you were describing is what holds people back, right? Is that fear of failure. And you can look back at your career and say, I took those risks and use that as examples. But do you think fear of failure holds us back too often?
Well, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fear of failure is a natural human
Yeah.
reaction. Even going through this cancer battle, it occurs to me, my gosh, I'm going through all these just, really debilitating 6 chemo treatments. And what if this fails? What if? And then I think to myself, you can't think that because if you think that, then it may happen. So, first of all, fear of failure is only an illusion. So, it's about the future and it could or could not happen. So I tell people if you lean into it or buy into it, shame on you because so that's a fear that's an irrational fear in many cases. However, I think I like to frame it as you're going to make mistakes,
Hmm.
and mistakes are good teachers because by definition, taking risks means you're leaning into some areas of uncomfortability, of new learnings, of new horizons, of new competencies, of new, really stretch assignments. So you should be uncomfortable and you should realize that mistakes are going to be a part of it. So, what is failure? I mean, failure is just, yeah, make the mistake, but don't let it linger. If you've hurt someone or done something, then apologize and then think to yourself, okay, what could I do differently? And then move on.
Right.
And no, don't beat yourself up about it, which I think I, as a woman, was probably in my early career. The first thing I did was just continually say, oh, you should have known. Why did you do that? But I've learned now to say, look, I'm sorry, I made this mistake and publicly admit it and just say, yes, it was of my doing. I should have done this differently, but you know what? Next time I'm going to da 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 da. So I think failure is, a big word. And quite honestly, I look back at my career and say, I've had a lot of mistakes, but have I had failures? No, because I've learned a lot. And I think that to me was almost like a second or third or fourth MBA. So
For
it's
sure.
all a good thing, actually.
So, what do you think your biggest risk was in your career? Was it that U.S. Bancorp job when you decided to take that on at that point of your professional maturity?
No, I don't think that was one because I really had my sponsor mentor right at my side. And so I felt like I had a big safety net there, thank goodness. I mean, it felt like a big leap, and it was. And if Gary hadn't been there saying, I'm with you, I've got your back, which he did, I don't think I think it would have been a much bigger perceived risk. I actually think taking the Seattle Foundation job was the biggest
Hmm.
so called risk, only because I'd never run a nonprofit.
Hmm.
And interviewing for the job, I remember the board saying to me, because I had been on the board, I stepped off to interview finally. And I remember the board saying to me, you don't know how to run a nonprofit. I mean, what is it in you that thinks you can just step in and run this great institution? You've been all business, this isn't a business. Do you see the difference? Do you understand? Do you realize that, we're not about kind of quick metrics, measurable outcomes each quarter and year? And I really had to think about that because I realized I had not run a nonprofit. I've been on, 50 plus nonprofit boards, but it's different when you're the CEO. So I think for me, that was probably a big leap to even put my name in the hat and say to the board, I believe I'm the right person because, and I do get it. I'm going to learn a ton. I'm going to make mistakes. But if you board would support me in that and understand that these are the strengths I bring, then I'm your person for the job. But I really walked away thinking, holy God, do I really know what I'm getting into? Because this is a very different sort of job than I've ever had in my life. So yes, I'd say that was the biggest risk. It turned out to be a good risk, but again, difficult in the beginning because I had to learn a lot about that type of organization that
Yeah, it
I'd
could be
never run.
intimidating. I mean, it's connected. It's the most connected foundation, especially at that time, I would say. So
You
that's under.
absolutely,
Yeah, I mean,
and with the best reputation of
yes.
anything. So I thought to myself, yeah, there's only one place to go with this reputation, and that isn't up
Yeah.
after following a legend like Anne Farrell, who was really Mother Teresa, I used to call her. And,
Mm-hmm.
she just passed away this year. God rest her
Mm-hmm.
soul. But, it was not a job where I felt like anything was broken and I could go in and fix it, which I'm good at. It was a job where I thought, oh, there's only one place to go and it's not up, and that's a big risk.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be there was a lot more to do.
So you've had this professional career, in the banking industry. You've had this exposure to nonprofits and board seats, and then your family experience. And I just wonder, with all of that, what have you learned about people? Because you've met and worked with people of all different social and economic backgrounds. And is there a common thread or thought you have as it relates to people?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the thing I've learned over the many years of management and now being on boards of companies is that, fundamentally people want to do the right thing.
Mm.
So my job as a leader is to set the culture, the tone, the environment to enable that to happen, but also to hold people accountable that don't act in accordance with the values and the culture. So I do think that's a two-edged sword, so to speak, and that most people absolutely they're there because they want to be there. And I think that's believing in the best of people and giving people the opportunity, even though it may not look like on the surface they're running as fast or moving quickly, enabling people to really be their best selves and succeed in a organizational environment is probably the job of a leader. But again, the other side of that, the edge of the sword, so to speak, is I think, not letting the bad apples, which there usually aren't very many, but if there are people who appear to be the big stars, bringing in all the business, doing all the right things, at least by the metric standpoint, but they're not living the values, they're cutting corners, or it's about them, not about the organization. As a leader, you have to make those tough calls. So it isn't all about, right, roses and flowers and balloons. It's about also holding everyone to the same standards, including yourself, by the way. So I think that's the tough part of the job. I can't ever say it's easy to tell someone, look, this just isn't working out. We need to figure out how to move you on. And
Mhm.
I've had to do that in many, many cases. It's never easy, but you realize that it's the best thing for the organization in the long run.
Yeah. Well, your leadership skills are clearly apparent, and you've brought a lot of great experience, and sharing it, Phyllis, is such a treat to me and to everyone listening. So appreciate you being here. We want to wish you the best, send you our thoughts and prayers on your health, and just have you embrace that community around you as you continue to go forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Greg.